Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here, and today you find yourselves as vampires, Frankenstein's monsters, zombies, or wizards who are Mythic Manor students competing to get as many of the other students caught by the Tome Keeper as you can without getting caught yourself. Mythic Mischief is a game of high stakes hijinks for 1 to 4 players. For ages 14 and up, it takes 45 to 90 minutes to play and is published by IV Studio. It's on GameFound right now, so I'm going to show you how the game works and I'll see you on the other side. This is a GameFound preview, so all the art and components you see here are not final, they're prototypes. So check the GameFound link in the description of this video to see all the final art and components. Here is one of the many variable setups of the game. In this game, we're playing a 2-player game. It is the Purple Wizards versus the Green Frankenstein's Monsters. I'm going to go over a 2-player game, and I'll tell you what the 3 and 4-player games, how they differ a little bit later. This game essentially is a race. You're trying to be the first to score 10 mischief points. Now, over the course of the game, each player is going to take a turn, and each turn goes through 3 phases. You have a Mythic Phase, where you'll be taking different actions with your Mythics. Then you're going to have a Tome Keeper Phase, where this Tome Keeper is going to move around, and you're then going to have a Cleanup Phase. Now the game has essentially 2 halves. We have before lunch and after lunch, and there's many of each of these cards. One of them is randomly selected each game for before lunch and after lunch. At the beginning of the game, only the before lunch card's out, and this tells you how to set things up and how the board is sort of generated at the beginning of the game. We'll get into the after lunch later. And in addition to the setup for the before lunch card, there's also different places to place these different bookshelf walls that you can't move through. So there's a lot of different variable setups that are already preset. And you can also, once you know the game really well, you can actually, through a drafting method, set up the board with, that's basically the most strategy you can have in setting up the game. So here we're looking at a fully set up 2-player game, and again, the players were able to select certain spots that they could start on as well. Now we talked about getting 10 mischief points to win. Well, how do you get that? Well, over the course of the game on your turn, as I mentioned, you're gonna be doing different actions, which I'll show you in a moment, usually moving your figures around, doing things like that. But then the Tome Keeper is gonna move, and it's gonna move in a pretty known pattern. See, in the before lunch phase, which is basically the first half of the game, as I showed you this red card is how we set this up earlier, the Tome Keeper is going to go to the different places. For example, first he's going to move to this 1, and then after he gets there, he's going to come and move to the 2, and then he's going to move to the 3. He's always going to go in the quickest way possible. And what you're trying to do is force it so that the Tome Keeper runs through the enemies or the other players' mythics. Because every time the Tome Keeper catches one of the other players, it gets removed from the board temporarily, and you gain a point. But what you don't want to happen is by accident or by mistake, you don't realize it, but if the Tome Keeper goes through one of your players, you actually lose a point. So you're essentially trying to force the Tome Keeper to run into the other player. That's how you get your points. Now here I'm looking at the Wizards board. Again, every player has its own board. Now there's 4 sort of main actions in the game. One of them's moving, and the other one is sort of distracting, which is pulling the Tome Keeper closer towards one of your players, hoping to put him in a line so that it'll end up running through the other players' mythics, as I just mentioned. There's 2 others, which is one is like moving other players' mythics and moving bookshelves. But both of these are very different for each faction that you play. They do generally the same thing, moving other players' mythics and moving bookshelves, but they all do it in a different way and gives each faction some special abilities. You'll also have some other abilities that each faction has by themselves that we'll talk about a little bit later. So when it's your turn, you start in the Mythic Phase and you're going to be playing with these different actions. Now as you can see, the dice start here, so in move I have a 1 and a 2, and if I want to use these actions, I'll simply decrease the value. So this is a 1, if I decrease it once, I can take a move action. So let's say I just move this mythic here. Now on here are some tomes of all the players, and you'll get these and you'll collect them. Now everyone actually starts with a tome in their sort of special ability, but you'll be gaining these because a little bit later I'll show you how you can upgrade some of these dice and such and boost different powers with these tomes. But I still have 2 movements left if I want to use them. You can do this in any order, and you can use as many of these actions as you want until they go to 0 like this. Now there is some clutter tokens, again, during setup that's where they go, and it costs 2 to move into those. So I can use my last 2 actions to also get a tome. Maybe I want to move another player's mythics. This is warp for the wizards. They get to basically swap spots with one that's neighboring you. And again, when taking an action, we'll decrease it by 1. Here, we can shift. Again, this is moving the different bookshelves. And for the wizards, you can slide a bookshelf 1 space along its current orientation, either up or down or left, right. So maybe you slide this one, which you're right next to, and you slide it like this, maybe blocking this character from going that way. And again, when we take that action, we go like this. Now, you could have stopped early, but in this case, I've used all my actions, so I'm done with my Mythic Phase. Then we're going to go to the Tome Keeper's phase, and it's going to move 4, and it's going to go to that number 1. Now, it's going to move 4. Remember, it takes 2 to move through the clutter. And it's going to use the quickest path. So this should be 1, 2, 3, 4. It would get here because it's trying to get to this 1. Or it could go 1, 2, 3, 4. Here, it's tied. It's the same amount of movements. It has to make the quickest, path. But the active player gets to decide if it's tied. So this Tome Keeper is going to go 1, 2, 3, and because it ran in and caught the other player, this gets removed from the board temporarily, gets given to that player. And hooray, we have 1 mythic point. Remember, the first 1 to 10 wins. And it's going to move here for its 4th movement. Now, eventually it's going to get to the 1, and then it would start, once it got here, it's going to start going to the number 2, which is down here, and I'm in its way, so it's probably going to come get me next time, so this probably wouldn't have been the greatest place to be right now, so you have to think a few turns in advance, but it would have ended its turn here. Then we're going to go to the cleanup phase. Now again, I may have had some actions that I didn't use, but that's okay. When you're done, you'll still use them. And this is important because any action dice that are partially or fully used move all the way to the left. I use this, so it's actually going to go here. But then you can also use tomes that you've gotten. And these tomes can be used in different ways. One is the special ability, but we'll get back to this later. I'm going to go over the abilities later. But in addition to all these other actions, you could spend this, you get rid of it, and you could do this special ability, which is move a wizard to any open space. Now, if I had used this and this was empty, I could use this to now repopulate that. Now this ability I can use next turn. This, I can upgrade one of the actions. And so, for example, if I wanted to have upgraded the one I just used, I would put this here, and now this is back to 1. And then so this is going to go to a 1 like that. But if I hadn't done that, and I had used this like this, it slides all the way down. And if I didn't have a tome, then I might not be able to use this next turn. Now, in addition to these tomes that are being used, let's say I wanted to, use the tome here, so this got upgraded like this. Now it does say fully or partially used. Now I haven't gone over the distract yet, so let's talk a little bit about that. Now this allows you to pull the tome keeper 1 space for each action that you use closer to one of your people. And that's another way to get them to run into the other player's characters, mythics. But let's say I had this all the way up here. I had boosted it a bunch of times. Even if I use this once in this cleanup stage, it's going to go all the way back down to here. So there's a lot of strategy as to do I want to use it? It's going to move all the way down even if I use it partially, so I might as well use it all and things like that. So there's a lot of different strategy in how that works. So I would have put the tome like this. Now, in addition to doing that, you're then going to boost 2 abilities, and you can move a die 1 space, or you can boost the same ability. So let's say you get 2 boosts. So I'll move this one to here, and let's say I move this one to here. So and at that point, you're going to flip them all up. So now I have 3 actions here. I'll have 1 action here. I'll have 1 action here, and I'll have 1, down on this one just below it, and I'll have 1 here. So let's reset the board here. So it might look something like that. And again, in this case, we had gotten 2 tomes. Let's just assume we had used that and replaced that with 1 and this. So over the course of the game, you're sort of deciding which ones you want to sort of move up, almost, permanently, but also which ones you're going to sort of boost for next round. So there's a lot of strategy in that alone. Then it'd be the next player's turn. They'd go through their Mythic Phase doing the same types of things. Now they have a different way of moving other players. They throw them because they're strong, right? If they're in between, next to someone, either next to them in this way or even diagonal, they can take them and throw them to the other side of them, assuming that that they're not throwing them through a wall and things like that. And their way of moving the bookshelves is the barge. It essentially moves it and it sort of turns it into a different spot like that. Now you can never have one of those things on the edge of the board, but you would essentially turn them in one of these 2 different directions. Now its special abilities Intimidate, again, you would spend this on your turn and neighboring enemy moves 2 spaces towards the Tome Keeper. So it's kind of like a really powerful distract, but instead of pulling the Tome Keeper towards you, it basically moves the enemy 2 spaces towards the Tome Keeper, so it's sort of like a different way there. Now let's take a look at some of the other factions here. We have the zombies, and again, the move and distract always work the same regardless of the factions. But this one, you're moving others, you can infect and move an adjacent ally or enemy diagonally 1 space. And to move the bookshelves, you can toss, essentially moving a bookshelf to the opposite side of either an opposing space or the opposite space of where you're in. Now, just like before, you can't put those on the edge of the board, and you can never block off a section of the library completely, and those are always the rules for moving the bookshelves. And zombies stink, so their special ability with the tome is stench, and the neighboring Tome Keeper, which means it's somewhere around you, surrounding you, they're going to move 2 spaces directly away from you. Really cool. Now the vampires are the last faction I'll show you today in detail. Is when they move other mythics, they can lure them. For each action of this, it moves them 1 towards them. And it could be normal, up, down, left, right, or it could be diagonal as well. And if you use the conceal, it rotates the bookshelf around the space that you're in. And your special trance that uses a tome, essentially neighboring enemies will move 2 spaces in any one direction. But you can't trance through bookshelves, and they move until they hit 2 spaces or hit a bookshelf, essentially. So again, during the Tome Keeper phase, it's going to be moving to 1, then to 2, the quickest way, then to 3, the quickest way. Now once it gets to 3, if it still has movement slip, it's going to start going towards the center. Then the before lunch gets face down, the after lunch gets face up. Again, there's many of these different cards. It's now going to move 3, but you'll also set them up, the board like this with the different tomes in different areas and the 1, 2s, and 3s, because these will flip over now to the purple side, and you'll place these where these belong on 1, 2, and 3 on the board. And by the way, these circles here, there were also some on this one. When you get knocked off the board because the Tome Keeper has caught in you and you come back to you, you're going to be able to put them back on the board, and you always end up putting them in one of these spaces like that, assuming it's open. Now also, once the after lunch phase is enacted, players are going to get another ability depending on their faction. For example, Blood for Vampires. You get to collect 1 of these for every enemy you pass over, and at the end of your turn, you trade blood in for a dice upgrade, putting it up. And then the left special is Portals for Wizard, and once per turn, you place this under a wizard, and they act adjacent spaces for movement, so you can really go through the portals quickly around the board. Frankenstein's monsters use a trap, and it traps an adjacent enemy, and then you basically put that under them, and they can't move the following turn. And the zombies can use Decay. You put this once per turn underneath a zombie, and if an enemy enters onto that space, you get to move them to any adjacent space, and then you remove this. So it's sort of like you might be able to push them into the Tome Maker in that case. So it might now look like this, and again, you'll continue taking turns until either the Tome Keeper ends up getting to 1, 2, and then 3. And if it did get to 3, then at the end of that turn, whoever has the most mythic points wins. Otherwise, the first player to get to 10 would win. Now, if you're playing a 3-player version, 2 players will be on a team. They'll use only two mythics each, where the player playing on their own will have 3 mythics each. They'll take turns, like they'll have their normal turn, but when they take their turn, they're sort of spending their actions together. And then when it's time to boost, each of them only get 1 boost, where this player gets to boost twice. And also, playing with the teams, only 1 color's tomes will go out on the board, and they essentially just share those. If you're playing with 4 players, then each team will have 2 factions and 2 of the mythics each, and you play it as if I was describing this. That's how you do that for both teams of 2. Now, there is a solo mode in development by Nick Shaw and David Turtsey, so check out the GameFound page to learn more about that. And on that page, you'll also find other factions like witches, trolls, and more, so check out that link to see all the different factions available. Now, there's other variants of the game as well. There's different ways to do tournaments, and there's a blitz mode where you'll use a timer to keep track of the turns, and you basically have 2 minutes to execute your plan. But when you get caught, you don't come back on the board. You're eliminated, and the last team standing wins. Well, there you have Mythic Mischief, and as I showed in the overview, you're managing your asymmetric faction in an abstract nature to get to 10 Mischief points first. Now, if you'd like to see all the final art and components and all the different pledge levels available, you can click the link below me right in the description of this video. Now, that's going to take you directly to the GameFound project page, and I'm sure that IV Studio would love your support.